We have come together today to pay our respects to James Edward Oppenheim, Hamachuna, who was beloved as Jimmy, to all who knew him and loved him. It's customary that we do our best to remember so many of his virtues and tell over his life story, his accomplishments, as they set a standard for us to live up to for the rest of our lives. Jimmy, the beloved husband of Shirley, Sarabela, loving father of Elise and Daniel, Julius, and Joan, and Kirk Morgenstern, and Pamela and Robert Orchin. Devoted grandfather of Ilana, Milch, Micha, and Marcy Julius, Jacqueline Brad Bell, Kaylee Morgenstern, and the late Rachel Julius. Cherished great-grandfather of Leora, Shoshana, Rivka, Morgan, and Murphy. Dear brother of the late Louise Frisch and Evelyn Medoff. It's customary that we begin with a chapter of Psalms. Ashrei ha'isha shelo halach b'atzas rishoyim. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Rather, that one's delight is in the Torah of the Lord, in God's laws, meditating in God's Torah day and night. And that one will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, whose leaf will not wither, and whatever that one does prospers. Not so the wicked, who are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not survive judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of righteous. For the Lord loves the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed. Express my appreciation to the family that really came together last week in Menorah Park to do our best to prepare for this sad time, and yet to try to do justice to Jimmy, who he was, what he stood for, and the kind of person and family he has and had. At this time, we wanted to ask the family members to come up and speak, and I thought that I would speak after the family is completed speaking and give over some of the beautiful details that Shirley and her daughter shared with me at Menorah Park the other day. I had a lot of time to think this over. I suddenly came down with a cold on Shabbos, and so I just stayed home all Shabbos. I'm usually, of course, running to shul, and all I could think about was Jimmy's beautiful life story and the beautiful things that you shared with me. And so it has really been moving me. And we invite the family to come and say a few words. This is Joan.
We are lucky to have had my dad for almost 93 years. If he was here now, he'd be telling all of us a joke or talking about his wine-selling days. My dad was married to our beautiful mother for 69 years. Had 3 beautiful daughters. Well, that's what he would say. And actually, we might even say 4 daughters, because he felt that way about his nurse at Menorah Park, Jennifer. He was a father that volunteered to drive us everywhere because he was always worrying about who was driving and what time we'd get home. After we got married, he would cut our grass, wash our windows, and even shop for us. And if there was a sale on toilet paper, well, forget that, because he'd be over with rolls and rolls of toilet paper, and he would be saying, "What? It was on sale." My dad would not want us to be hanging around here too long. He would say, "Go help Jackie with the kids," or "Go home and feed the dogs," Or tell Shirley, if you have to go to Mark's, go early. I can still hear him saying, "Okay, Shirley, let's go already."
Hello, I am Jackie, one of the grandchildren, and when someone passes away, I think it's natural to reflect on your life with them. I was left with a general sense of positive memories of Grandpa Jimmy, but when my mom asked me to speak, it required me to think about my life with him in more detail, which I was happy to do. There isn't one event that stands out, but many small ones over a lifetime that I can recall. I remember him driving me around in his blue jacket and beige cap. I remember him driving me in his Buick when I was in grade school. I remember him sitting in the brush bleachers watching me play basketball. I remember him cutting my parents' lawn. I remember the big smile he'd have when I walked in his room at Menora Park with my girls, Morgan and Murphy. She's 2 girls, 3 and 1. He would talk to them and smile. He was always so happy to have us. When we would visit, he would always introduce us to the staff. It was clear he was proud. He was a proud grandfather, but most importantly, a great grandfather to 5 girls. He's already got 3, girl after girl. He enjoyed telling, he would always thank me for coming to visit too, even though all he'd do when we came was follow Morgan, my 3-year-old, to the 3 or 4 different kids' stations and watch her play. He enjoyed telling stories of his young DJing years. He also talked about his life in the wine business. He had many stories and enjoyed telling them. I also remember him joking around. He seemed to like engaging people and making them smile. He loved talking with Micah, who he seemed to have a special bond with. That's our other cousin. The past few years, he reflected on his life and a few close friends and often talked about writing a book about those relationships. Finally, he would share how he and Grandma met. He loved her very much. I remember talking to Grandpa about the things he enjoyed most, and his response was family, watching everyone grow up and have kids. All of my memories really reflect that value. There was no doubt he loved us, and he will be very missed.
When I reflect on my Grandpa Jimmy's life, rather than remembering one distinct moment, I think of the love he had for his family. The love and devotion that he shared with my grandma was a bond that only time and dedication can build. His face always lit up when his great-grandchildren, Morgan, Murphy, Leora, Shoshana, and Rivka, walked into the room. My grandpa was a devoted husband, a caring father, and a loving grandfather and great-grandfather. He loved to share funny stories of his past, often laughing as he would share these stories. I will miss him sharing these stories when we were sitting around the table, eating dinner as a family.
Hello, I'm Micah. My mom, Elise, is Jimmy and Shirley's oldest daughter. And I'm going to say a few words. And my sister, Alana, and my dad, Dan, both really wanted to be here. They couldn't. They both wrote a few words. So I'm going to say a few words, then read my sister's, then read my dad's. So you're stuck with me for a few minutes. So Grandpa Jimmy, I loved Grandpa Jimmy. I always knew him as a man of few words. So you would never know his past unless you got him talking and asked the right questions. And you would never know he had such a tough upbringing. Lost his dad at a very young age, started working at a very young age. And just raising these 3 girls and caring for his wife and 3 kids and in such a comfortable manner, in and of itself, I feel like was a major accomplishment, what he did. And I really looked up to him. You know, he didn't talk about everything he did. He just did it. He was a doer, and it was really a trait that I look up to. Now, he would open up if you asked the right questions or if you were hanging out with him for a while. And chances are when he did, he would be telling a joke. He cracked a lot of jokes. His sense of humor, I think, was a big part of his personality. And for example, so growing up, this won't be hard to imagine. My hair, I've got curly hair. You can't use a comb. It turns into like a big afro. So when anytime I would see him, like clockwork, he would say, "Hey, you need a comb?" And, he didn't have a lot of hair, so I think this was just for effect. Like, he would have a comb with him, and sometimes he would just hold it up and say, "Huh? You need that?" So, always making me laugh. My dad had a quilt of ties. He ran into someone who makes quilts out of ties. So, my grandpa set a few ties aside, and my uncles Kirk and Rob gave him a couple of ties so that he could give them to me so my dad could give it to this person to make this quilt. And when I came over, he had these ties, and he looked at me and says, "Don't wear them all at once." And so that one, like, when I think about that, I still laugh. And then finally, this is my favorite, watching baseball. Every single time, he would get a kick out of this. The players, he says, "Look at these guys. They adjust their batting gloves. They kick the dirt off their cleats. They adjust their shirt. They go like this. They adjust their gloves again. They get in there, and they strike out." And he's like, "Why don't they just go in there and swing the bat?" So these are some of my favorite jokes. I feel like I connected with him through the humor, and I grew up playing drums. In true Grandpa Jimmy fashion, I had no idea he played the drums until I started playing them. He says, "Oh, I used to play the drums." And then he gets this picture out where he's behind his drum set. I love it. It's now on Grandma Shirley's mantle with him behind this. Drums have evolved a lot since he played them. So it's this old school, old drum kit, and it says "Always Beating for You" on the bass drum. And I love that picture. And that really kind of encompasses who he is. That was all about Grandma Shirley. Now, when I asked him why he stopped, he said, "Well, I'd sold the drums because I had to marry your grandma." And I'm glad I was talking to Grandma Shirley about this last night. She says, "Wait a minute, when I met him, he wasn't playing drums anymore. So I don't know if he was cracking a joke or what." So to this day, I'm still laughing at the things he said. But the point is, even though he may have not played them anymore, it's still the moral of that story holds true, which was that his family was so important to him that they came first. And that's kind of his best legacy, his 3 beautiful, amazing daughters and his wife. So, even if he sold them before he met her, it still holds true that kind of his family comes before everything. Loved having the family together. So, we'll all miss him. And that's my few words. I'm now going to read a couple of words that my sister wrote. I don't know if not many of you know her. She's a character. She's kind of stream of consciousness, so bear with me. In Memory of Grandpa Jimmy by Alana Julius. I feel very fortunate to have grown up with Jimmy Oppenheim as my grandfather. I remember him as a strong and quiet grandfather who was generally in a good mood. I remember him as a caring man who helped Grandma Shirley with whatever she needed. I might not think a man like that could exist, but sure enough, Grandpa Jimmy was just that sort of man. He was kind and calm, and sometimes he would worry, but it was only out of love for his family. When I was around Grandpa Jimmy, I knew that if I needed anything at all, I could ask him, and that he would not judge me in any way. I also knew that at any given moment, he might say something so funny and so witty that it would elicit a deep chuckle. I remember he would enjoy reading the newspaper in the morning while eating his breakfast. I remember he always made it a point to hand me cash before I would leave to go to the airport. As I got older and started to work, I thought this tradition would stop, but it didn't. I think that was his way of saying he wasn't going with me, so he wanted to send me with something in case I needed anything. I remember one night while visiting, I was sitting at the kitchen table as my famous Grandma Shirley, whom I secretly refer to as Betty Crocker, was making dinner. Suddenly I noticed Grandpa Jimmy dipping chicken into cornflake crumbs and lining it ever so perfectly on a pan. Then he did something I had never seen anyone do. He sliced margarine thinly and placed it on top of each chicken piece. I was probably not even a teenager yet. I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if that will taste good. An hour later, I bit into the most delicious piece of chicken I had ever tasted. Wow, Grandpa Jimmy could not only fix things around the house, but he could also cook. It was only years later I saw a video of him being honored and giving a speech about his career selling wine that I could fully appreciate just how many hats my grandpa could wear, not to mention the family hat. 3 more pages. No, I'm just kidding. It's one more paragraph. I also remember taking small trips to the post office and the grocery store. He was always asking me kindly if I wanted anything in particular. A few weeks ago, I saw Grandpa Jimmy and we had a sweet, short talk. I was so thankful to hear his voice. He seemed happy for one moment, and I felt that he appreciated my visit. I told him I wanted him to know that he gave me the best mother a child could ever hope for. I thanked him for being a great dad and grandpa. He nodded, and I was happy I could tell him this in person. As my short stay was coming to a close, I saw once again a devotion and love between two people that no Nicholas Sparks movie could ever capture. Grandpa Jimmy asked where Mother was, referring to Grandma Shirley. I told him she would be there shortly. He nodded. Grandma Shirley came in looking 15 years younger than her age. She held his hand. She rubbed cream on his skin. She told him he should have the protein first, then the dessert. I also saw her kiss his hand before she left that night. When I think about a positive partnership between a man and a woman, I think of my Grandma Shirley and my Grandpa Jimmy. Now, a couple words that my dad wanted to say, and then I will be on my way. To gathered family, I'm sorry I could not be there with you today to share both in the sadness of losing a loved one and to celebrate a well-lived life. Death is, of course, final, but also part of the life cycle and who we are. While the person we mourn has transcended life and is now at peace, those remaining alive feel a sense of disruption, grief, loss, a myriad of feelings, images, and thoughts gathered from a lifetime of knowing a husband, father, brother, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle, brother-in-law, father-in-law, all of the complex relationships that define who we are. This occasion is also a celebration of a life well lived. Indeed, it is important to celebrate and honor people like Jimmy, who as a loving spouse and father, worked hard, was successful, and left behind an intact family in the broadest sense of the word. He was the real thing, a mensch, fair, patient, smart, and understated. His humor, common sense approach, and attitude toward people, which can be described as compassionate and understanding, will be very missed. To my mother-in-law, Shirley, who was a devoted partner and wife, and advocate, and to Elise, Pam, and Joan and their immediate families, my condolences. To all those present, may we all live with the same authenticity and generosity of spirit as Jim did. Our lives are richer because of his presence.
Words from the heart penetrate the heart. Eliyahu Jimmy was born to Elmer and May Oppenheim. May was a Pollock. Elmer was from Austrian-German descent, and May Pollock was of Hungarian descent. Both Elmer and May were born here in Cleveland in the 1800s. Family lived on Marlandale in Cleveland Heights. Elmer was a prominent businessman. Jimmy's father had 3 hosiery stores together with his brothers. And May, his wife, was a homemaker. And they had their children Evelyn, Louise, and Jimmy. Evelyn born in 1916, Louise 1923, and Jimmy in 1925. And then tragedy struck. Jimmy's father, Elmer, died in 1929. Jimmy was, according to what I have, he was 4 years old. And he really didn't remember his father. He was so touched. He had a beautiful picture of his dad at Menorah Park that he would look at. And he said to me, "Rabbi, you probably think I'm crazy, but I tell you, every night now before I go to sleep, I say, 'Good night, Dad.' And I can almost be sure Dad's mumbling back, 'Good night, Jimmy.'" Well, when Elmer died suddenly like that, May moved to an apartment, imagine, left the home, worked in the Halley Brothers, and worked to raise the children. She had 3 orphans. And Jimmy had responsibilities. He had to do different things to help the family keep going, and a lot of things he did was at home to help out. Wash the floor, take care of the kitchen and the windows. At age 13, he would go to work delivering, I believe, by bicycle, the kosher chickens on Coventry. Many of us at Menorah Park remember the shochtim, the ritual slaughterers on Coventry, where you could choose your chicken. And that's what Jimmy did to make some money. He would deliver the chickens by bicycle. And then he also he worked in the Weinberger pharmacy, and he would sell cigars and novelties. And he had a golden personality. People just loved him, and he had this engaging way about him. And he found a way to move cigars. I mean, it's said about him that he didn't have any idea sometimes what some of the cigars were called. He made up these Yiddish names for the cigars. People were coming in. He says, yes, would you like, what's that? Oh, that's a Schmendrick. Would you like a Schmendrick? Maybe you want, this is, last week you gave me a Nudnik, you know? And so he's selling these cigars, and people are all happy. And you can imagine the boss sees the cigars are moving. And he had this way about him. He was just a great humorist. He always had a joke ready that was applicable to the situation. Jimmy was a great storyteller. He went to Heights High, and he really kept the aides at Menorah Park, the nursing staff, the aides, and the people always smiling. He always had a joke that he could apply to their lives. Jimmy, when he was younger, he was also a disc jockey for proms and dances, and it was going well until he kept all the records and equipment in a car, and somehow his friend left a cigarette in the car, and there was a fire, and all the records warped. And Jimmy would always joke about that. I mean, that's an indication of the kind of person he was. It wasn't an angry story or a frustrating story. It was a humorous story when he told it over. The loss of all those records and the sudden end of his disc jockey business. There's some in the family believe he worked in the Cleveland Indians concessions. He definitely had a ball signed by Bob Feller, and the boys from the Hebrew Academy would come to chat with Jimmy when they come twice a month on Friday, and they would always talk baseball. They were always excited to see him. They always would come and say, Rabbi, how's Mr. O? How's Mr. O? It's going to be hard to tell them when they come next time. He worked in the Aaron Brew Beer as a salesman. He worked for Aaron Brew Beer and Roller Wine. He was also a tennis player and drums, as we heard from Micah. Jimmy played drums maybe when he was 18 or 19. He played drums beautifully until the neighbors complained. Then he stopped playing drums. In 1947, something happened that would really change Jimmy's life forever. He was making calls to help build attendance at Park Synagogue's People's League gatherings. And he called Shirley and told her, you know, we have an event coming up in 2 weeks, and will you be able to come? I hope you'll be able to come. And Shirley Sarabela said, yes, absolutely, I plan on coming. Well, meanwhile, Shirley forgot. And Jimmy called to follow up. He said, you know, I really would like to meet you. Maybe we could get to see each other. And he was persistent. Shirley's parents were Max and Ida Leibovitz, and they often would sit on the porch in the evening. And once Jimmy became acquainted with them, he would come over and join them, sitting on the porch together. The family lived at Washington and Taylor, and Jimmy would come over, and Shirley's mother, Ida, would offer him different treats, lamb riblets, other items that he would enjoy. And Shirley's parents were really very, very comfortable with Jimmy. Now remember, you know, Jimmy was an orphan, really, having lost his dad when he was a little boy. And I think we know that God is very clear about being loving the orphan, caring for the orphan. And it's just marvelous, really, Shirley, that he was able to find that kind of an attachment with your parents, the kind of love Shirley says her parents loved how he dressed. He was always clean and handsome, always smiling, jovial, and really the family. Irving was the only one of the siblings home. There was Paul, Morris, Shirley, and Janet, but Irving got along well with Jimmy. It was the kind of situation where Jimmy would be sitting on the porch with her parents when she'd come back from dating another boy. But that really tells you something about the love Shirley's parents gave Jimmy, and the way they they really brought him in. They really loved him, and it's obvious. We all know why. He was really that kind of a human being. And Ida would ask Jimmy to run Shirley down to work at Chromex, where she worked, and they really were impressed with him as a mitzvah man, a real mensch, Now, when I was looking up, Jimmy was born, I was looking, the date that he was born was March 12th, 1925, which was the day after Shushan Purim. Isn't that interesting? Now, Purim is, the holiday of wine, right? I mean, we drink wine on Passover, but Purim is the holiday of wine, and Purim is the month of Simcha, of joy, as we say, Misha Nichnas Ador. When the Hebrew month of Adar comes, Marbim B'Simcha. And the Mazel, the zodiac, the constellation of Adar, is joy, Simcha. And it was really fascinating, Jimmy being born a day after Shushan Purim. It really means that it's at the spiritual height of the month. You know how Jewish months are. The moon begins at the beginning of our months, and then Passover or Sukkot are always right in the middle of the month with a full moon, which indicates the spiritual energy at the height of the month. Passover on the 15th of Nisan, and Sukkot, the middle of Tishrei, and Tu B'Shvat, that's coming up, the end of this month, the middle of Shvat. So the middle, and that's when he was born, and clearly he really, he gleaned, he took all the energy of that joyous month of Adar, and it was given to him in his personality. And he was 19 years old when he was quoted as saying, "All my life I've wanted a red convertible." And when he was 22 years old, he actually got himself a red convertible. In 1948, he and Shirley married. Rabbi Brickner was the Masada Kedushin. He led the service in the Euclid Avenue Temple. And they lived in Hampshire in a 6-room apartment with Jimmy's mother for a couple of years, which really is also just so wonderful, Shirley caring for Jimmy's mom, a widow, and that's really exceptional. And they would contribute to the expenses. Shirley worked, and May cooked. And then they were blessed with Elise was born. Jimmy made formula. He boiled the bottles. He used a bottle brush. He would turn them upside down. Shirley says he had it down to 20 minutes from start to finish. The whole process of preparing the bottles. Joan joined the family 4 years later, and then Pam another 3.5 years later. And Jimmy loved his little girls. He really did. They were the pride and joy, the apple of his eye, as we would say. The family remembers Jimmy getting them a record player, and the song was Mother's Little Helper that would play over and over again. Jimmy got a hold of a used tricycle, painted it red, an old TV cabinet that Alice still has, filled with kosher cookbooks now, painted red. The family lived on Farnhurst, Raymont, and I believe on Lidway for 41 years. Joan would go to skating events, and Jimmy would always be there. Pam, tennis, and Jimmy would always be there. He was very proud of them. And Jimmy and Shirley provided 3 beautiful weddings for their daughter. And they always worked hard their whole life to be able to help their children with whatever education they might need. And Jimmy was always thrilled with his sons-in-law hard-working men, and he loved them very, very much. Danny, the intellect, Kirk, the fix-it man, and Rob, the chef. Now, it's interesting. It was very important to Shirley that we talk a little bit about the Christian Brothers, and I read about the company. It's quite fascinating, and Jimmy was really an accomplished salesman for the Christian Brothers Wine Company. The Christian Brothers had grown grapes since 1882 in California. During Prohibition, they legally made sacramental wine, so that even during Prohibition, they were able to function, because you need wine to make blessings, just like Friday night we make Kiddush, right, at Menorah Park. In 1932, they relocated to Napa and returned to commercial production of wine and brandy following the repeal of Prohibition. Brother Timothy was a fast learner, and he established Christian Brothers as one of the leading brands in the state's budding wine industry. His smiling face in advertisements and promotional materials became one of the most familiar images for wine consumers across the country. Well, there we enter Brother Jimmy. So Brother Jimmy, when Christian Brothers was purchased and the new owners wanted to find a salesman that would relate well with the many Jewish wine and beer distributors, they were fortunate to find James Edward Oppenheim and bring him on board. Jimmy was the state manager of Christian Brothers Wines and Brandies. He was held in high esteem, respect, and admiration. He always left customers with a joke and a smile. Jimmy knew that if they laughed, they would remember him. He was known for his ability to sell some of the highest quantities of Christian Brothers wine at one time. He would move truckloads of his products while being called to travel back and forth to Napa Valley and participate in wine tastings arranged through various organizations, nonprofits, charities, country clubs. The Christian Brothers showed their appreciation by providing Jimmy with a pension for the rest of his life. And so, of course, many of us wouldn't be familiar with that because that was his job, but that's all of his accomplishment there for Christian Brothers. Neighbors considered Jimmy the mayor of Lindway. He cut grass, fixed lawnmowers, cultivate flower beds, enhancing and adorning the entire lot and trim. Pam says he loved animals. He was just that kind of person. He took care of flowers, he took care of lawns, and the dogs, the family dogs that he loved were Tupi, that's Tupi, and Eli, Lona, and Coco. And he also enjoyed the Menorah Park therapy dogs that would come around. He was very meticulous in what he did. He was also a bike rider who rode all over. We at Menorah Park, all of us had a mutual admiration for Jimmy, and many of the residents keep asking how he married a woman 30 years his younger. He enjoyed his 3.5-year stay there very much, and we know that Shirley was their constant presence. Shirley and I met her brother there as well, and spent some very special time together with the family there. And they're always a very important part of Menorah Park. Jimmy used to say, if someone needs to be in a facility, let it be a place like Menorah Park. He loved to sit at certain windows and watch special places. He had his own special routine. Our nurses and staff appreciated his humor very much. And so, we try to remember our loved one who came into this world in March, in Adar, and spent his life bringing joy to people and love, spreading love, caring for people, and raising Kinahara, Pu, a wonderful family. And at the same time, what becomes more important now is the Yortzeit, because each year we are who we are when we depart this world. And so each year, at this time, when we celebrate Jimmy's Yortzeit, his soul will ascend higher and higher by the good deeds that he did and that he taught us to do. And I know this family. I've come to know them fairly well over the years. We had a baby naming for Bracha, right? Is that Morgan? Bracha. Bracha is such a beautiful name. Blessing comes from the root of the word ni. The ni is called a berach, of course, in Hebrew. And, of course, God is the one to whom all knees must bend. So we bring blessing by, so to speak, by acknowledging God's graciousness. And so we had a baby naming. What a wonderful, wonderful occasion that you were able to bring to your grandfather. Wonderful, wonderful simcha. Then I met other children, I guess grandchildren. I met Ilana the other day. She had come, right? She came from New Jersey. Unbelievably energetic, a woman, really someone very, very special, a real trailblazer. You know, in the traditional community where I'm from, of course, you know, many of the leading families in our shul are kids that grew up, you know, in homes that may have been less traditional, but there's such a resurgence, a celebration of our identity and who we are, and those kids have really become leaders in our community, and it humbles me really to see such kind of people that really thinking people. Who thinks anymore? To be thinking people, what an attribute. They say the family is filled with scholars. That's what they say. Jimmy will be missed. Eliyahu ben Elmer will be missed. At this time, we rise for the Kel Malay prayer. El Malay Rachamim, Shoichen Bamroimim, Hametzei Menucha Nechoina, Al Kanfei HaShechina, B'Mahai Elois, Kedoshim Et Tehorim, Kezohar HaRakia Mashirim, Es Nishmas, Eliyahu ben Elmer, Sheholach Li'olamoi, Bavor Shanachnu Mispalin Baras Karas Nishmasoi, Began Einen Temenuchasoi, Lochein Bal HaRachamim, Yastireu B'Seisek Enafav, Li'olamim, V'yitzrar B'tzrar HaChayim Es Nishmasoi, Adonai Hu Nachalasoi, V'yanuach B'Shalom, Al Mishkavoi, V'noimar, Amen. God full of compassion who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament to the soul of James Edward, the son of Elmer, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his rest be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings, and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he rest on his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen. You may be seated. Following services and the interment, the family will receive friends at 3124 Richmond Road in Beechwood until 4 p.m. and then tonight from 7 to 9 p.m. Friends who wish may contribute to the Menorah Park Foundation or the Parkinson's Foundation. You know what? The time will come we're going to head out, of course, to Mount Olive, and that will be a place to forever return for the family. Each time we go, we'll continue to build Jimmy's monument, placing a stone, trying to internalize all of his attributes and make them a part of our lives. We would now ask the pallbearers to